Well, he doesn't make me laugh. I think I've got a fair sense of humor, but I can't really see it in him. I've listened to his show on the radio on a Saturday morning, and that's a load of mints as well. My great-grandfather started in the coal mines, and my great-grandmother made 10 pounds of bread every Saturday morning that we delivered to the neighbors. It was always about giving back. These kinds of things drive me to make a difference. When I get back home, I want to spend as much time with my family as I can. I love just being at home and not having to rush off anywhere, so on Saturday morning I might make a big breakfast with freshly squeezed orange juice, yogurt, eggs and bacon. When I first got into wrestling as a kid, would read all of the wrestling magazines I could get my hands on. There was a satisfaction discovering that there was a whole wrestling world that existed that you didn't see on TV on Saturday morning. There was this idea that there was this stuff going on there that they didn't want us to see. My mom was a big Smurfs fan, so she would force me to watch every Saturday morning. I had no choice in the matter. I would jump downstairs on Saturday morning, hooray, cartoons, and she would say, Smurfs. That's what you're watching. I adore my family, they are my joy. However, I am committed to my work. If, on a Saturday morning when I was ostensibly going to be with the children, and something arose at RADA or at UNICEF or at the orphanage or whatever, I would allow the other pressures to take precedent. I take my daughter to the San Mateo Farmers Market every Saturday morning, and despite repeated advice to the contrary, I usually do it on an empty stomach. Bad mistake. I wind up buying far more produce than our small family can eat within a week, which means I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to pack more vegetables into a single meal. You used to have those Saturday morning television shows. You had to do your bit. You had to go on and promote your new release. I quite enjoyed it, actually. You had the parents watching them, and they must have liked what they were seeing, so they'd encourage their kids. And then they'd end up bringing them to the shows. Your body tells you what it needs, and if you sleep past your alarm on a Saturday morning, it's probably because you need the sleep. I've always thought that a Saturday morning at home should be education time. I mean fun education, for example learning to cook a dish or reading about something new. So I put on documentaries, get a bunch of magazines and newspapers and use the morning to make myself better. My dad traveled so much for work that, when he was home, we always wanted to spend as much time with him as we could. So going to practices and doing stuff like that with him took precedence over Saturday morning cartoons. We'd go to practice with my dad just so we could be a part of it. Every Saturday morning when we are making breakfast, we twerk in the kitchen. It is so much fun. I feel like I was hit by all of geek culture at once while I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. Saturday morning cartoons like Star Blazers and Robotech. Live-action Japanese shows like Ultraman and The Space Giants. Flash Forward was on the outs when I was approached with happy endings. I literally got the script on a Friday, and on Saturday morning I met with David Casp, Jamie Tarsis, and the Russo brothers. I took the role on that Saturday, and on Monday I was doing a table read. It all happened very fast, but it was super exciting. When I was growing up we didn't have cable. All that came on Saturday morning was Notre Dame football, and I was there every time to watch it. My aunt had a season ticket for the Friday afternoon concerts, and I would go down for lessons. My lessons were Saturday morning. I'll co-host Today from Los Angeles Saturday morning and then make my way up to Merced for that evening's graduation ceremony. I'm still touching up my remarks, but my challenge to the class of 2010 will be to break through the deafening and too often negative echo chamber of the digital era and become critical and independent thinkers. Home for me is London now, and my weekend will start on a Saturday morning when I'll try to have a lie-in until 8 a.m. Anything longer than that feels like I'm wasting my day. I loved fantasy, but I particularly loved the stories in which somebody got out of where they were and into somewhere better, as in the Chronicles of Narnia, The Wizard of Oz, The Phantom Tollbooth, the Dungeons Dragons cartoon on Saturday morning in the 80s. I feel the art world in New York has a stronger following than Britain. If you go to a New York art district on a Saturday morning, it will be so busy with families and openings. Art is much more ingrained in the culture. I started ABC's Saturday morning programming. One of the reasons that I take such joy in being a trustee of the New York Public Library is the love of reading that I found as a child in the Saturday morning library events for preschoolers and first and second graders as I was growing up in Augusta, Georgia. Saturday morning, you knew what was cool by what was on Soul Train. When I was a kid, Land of the Lost was my favorite show, just because it was, in the landscape of Saturday morning cartoons, it was so unique. It was a live-action show and kids were in it, these creatures, these Sleestaks and dinosaurs. Every week was a different adventure. I couldn't wait. I loved it so much. I always wake up early Saturday morning, and I have a little bit more time, so I go to the gym. With Saturday morning cartoons, you've got to start at 6 a.m., right? I used to go round to my granddad's house on a Saturday morning, and we'd sit and eat our porridge and watch reruns of Steptoe and Son on BBC Two. I thought it was hilarious, and Rag and Bone Man sounded like a blues name to me. It reminded me of people like Sonny Boy Williamson and Big Mama Thornton. Mobile is a seaport town, and we ate a lot of seafood. We'd go fishing, we'd catch our fish and we'd eat our fish. It was a ritual on Saturday morning for all my family, my grandfather, my brothers, my uncles, my father, to go fishing, and then the ladies of the family would clean the fish and fry them up. My happy place is having a Saturday morning while everybody else is just mooching about, and I'll do a big old batch cook and have music on in the kitchen. Growing up in Canada, none of my family were performers or anything like that, but I was terrible at hockey, so they needed something for me to do on Saturdays for me to get out of the house. I signed up for theater school on Saturdays, and I'd go for 4.5 hours every Saturday morning and learn about theater. For a gut punch of nostalgia, consider that Saturday morning cartoons are now largely a thing of the past. Both my mum and dad were great readers, and we would go every Saturday morning to the library, and my sister and I had a library card when we could pass off something as a signature, and all of us would come with an armful of books. In Barbados, you have a beer with your food at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning and basically go on a pub crawl. I have to always go back to Tim Hortons, it's my favorite spot. I remember growing up as a kid, my mom, every Saturday morning she'd go to the hairdresser and she'd give me $2 to go buy donuts. I used to go to a Gaelic class on a Saturday morning, but I never felt myself that I could speak it properly. As a producer, the most important call you can get is on Saturday morning, when the Friday night grosses come in. As a director, you want your film to be successful, but your outlook is a bit different. You become very conscious of the reviews. Later, in the early teens, I used to ride my bike every Saturday morning to the nearest airport, 10 miles away, push airplanes in and out of the hangars, and clean up the hangars. Ever since my mother sent me to Saturday morning grammar classes when I was 7, I wanted to become a famous actor. I loved the idea of captivating an audience and moving them truly through performance, but more importantly being recognized and heavily lauded for that talent. We were pushing the boundaries a bit of Saturday morning telly and trying new things. Growing up, of course I was the coolest girl in the 3rd grade because I told everyone that my dad was a wrestler, and I would bring in these wrestling magazines of him, and every Saturday morning, he would be body slamming me on my bed. It's the little things you remember. My ma'am, Sue, would take me to training in a taxi when I was a kid if Dad, who is a builder, had to work on a Saturday morning. You look back at the stuff like that and realize the sacrifices were all worth it. When it first started, I loved the fact This Morning was an adult version of Saturday morning television. I remember lying on the floor of my room, staring at a black and white television for most of the 80s, watching Different Strokes, Facts of Life, Silver Spoons, Saturday morning cartoons, and Murder, She Wrote, while eating an insane amount of Stouffer's French bread pizza. I was sucked into it all. I'm not an early bird at all. Ideally, on Saturday morning I'd allow myself a lovely lie-in. 10:45 would be just right. Being raised Muslim, we had to get up at the crack of dawn to pray. There was no sleeping in, no getting up Saturday morning to watch cartoons because there was no TV in the house. But you got up and you worked, cleaned the house. I'd prefer no practices and just Saturday, Sunday. Just qualify Saturday morning, race Saturday afternoon, and race again Sunday. Less laps of nonsense and more laps of meaningful business. I miss Saturday morning, rolling out of bed, not shaving, getting into my car with my girls, driving to the supermarket, squeezing the fruit, getting my car washed, taking walks. I grew up watching The Lone Ranger. I would get up every Saturday morning, earlier than all the other kids, to watch a black and white western with Clayton Moore that hadn't filmed a new episode since 1957. There was always laughter in our house, and I have great memories of my dad making an Ulster fry on a Saturday morning. They were legendary even though he couldn't really cook. The thing that I miss more than anything is doing Saturday morning telly. It was the best 3 years. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.